today we're looking at a draft performance work statement for a contractor who's providing admin support to the Air Force and Space Force.
We're talking about supporting
some pretty important people.
Yeah, some pretty high up folks. The Secretary of the Air Force, Headquarters Air Force.
Even the Space Force?
Yeah, even the Space Force.
This is the Pentagon, the nerve center of national defense. So what's our mission today? What are we trying to figure out by looking at this document?
I think we're going to try and understand what this document really reveals about the inner workings of the Pentagon.
Yeah.
What kind of work actually happens there?
Yeah.
What are the challenges of supporting those at the very top of the military?
On the surface, it's just a list of tasks and requirements. But underneath, there's all this stuff about the culture, the security, the whole ecosystem of the Pentagon.
Absolutely. And one of the first things that I noticed was this emphasis on non-personal services in government contracting, where there's this need to maintain a really clear distinction between the roles of government employees and contractors.
Making sure the contractor doesn't overstep and start making decisions that should be left to the government folks.
Right, exactly. It's about accountability, transparency, and ensuring that the government ultimately retains control over sensitive functions.
Yeah.
That's why these performance work statements are so incredibly detailed. They lay out very specific expectations and requirements.
Let's get into the weeds here. What would this contractor actually be doing based on this PWS?
Well, it breaks it down into three main areas: administrative acquisition support, secretariat support,
and just good old clerical and admin support.
And each one gives us a little bit of a window into how the Pentagon operates.
All right, let's start with acquisition support.
Okay. This is where we see kind of how the Air Force gets all its stuff.
Okay.
Everything from aircraft to satellites, all the really high-tech, cutting-edge technologies.
So this contractor's not actually out there buying the fighter jets.
No.
But they're doing all the stuff behind the scenes.
Yeah. They're doing all the paperwork, the coordination.
To make it happen.
Yeah. They'd be supporting various air staff organizations like the AFA-1, which handles manpower and personnel, or SAFFM, which is all about the money.
So that's a lot of coordinating.
Oh, yeah. Coordinating with different departments, managing budgets, making sure everything's on the up and up.
Even if it's just admin.
Right. And I think this is another place where that non-personal services distinction comes into play. The contractor needs to do their job without actually making the decisions.
How much do they need to know to do their job?
Yeah. And the PWS really highlights that need for experience with all the government contracting regulations and procedures.
This is not an entry-level position.
No, not at all.
So let's say you're the contractor, you're doing this acquisition support.
Right.
What does your day look like?
Well, you might be assisting with the requirements planning phase of, let's say, a major acquisition, researching different options, coordinating with various teams.
So a lot of moving pieces.
Making sure everything aligns with the strategic goals.
So you're not just pushing paper?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
You're involved in shaping the future of the Air Force, really.
Yeah, but behind the scenes.
And then there's the requirement package development, where they take those initial plans and turn them into the concrete proposals.
Okay.
Drafting documents, creating presentations. You got to be a good writer. You got to be good on your feet, putting together all the paperwork necessary.
And a high tolerance for paperwork?
Oh, yeah. Huge tolerance for paperwork. And a keen eye for detail. The document mentions developing and maintaining business rules, which basically means you got to make sure everything is done by the book to the highest standard.
Well, especially when we're talking about this stuff.
Right. Billions of dollars.
All right, let's move on to the next area, secretariat support.
All right.
I feel like this is where things get a little more high profile.
Yes. This is where we're supporting the Air Force's senior leadership, generals, high-ranking civilians, the whole 9 yards.
We're talking managing calendars, coordinating events, handling VIP visits.
Keeping those at the top, running smoothly.
Yeah, and that probably takes a certain type of person, right?
Absolutely. And this document really emphasizes understanding, like military customs and courtesies. There's a certain protocol, a certain level of deference that's expected. And this role would require a deep understanding of that. The PWS also mentions reviewing correspondence, drafting meeting minutes, making sure everything is handled with the utmost professionalism.
So discretion is key.
They're privy to some high-level conversations.
Confidential information, conversations that could shape national policy.
Absolutely.
So it's not just about being organized, it's about being trustworthy.
That's right. And the document actually mentions some specific software systems that are used by the Pentagon, which gives us a little bit of a glimpse.
So, for example, there's mention of a 2-letter workflow mailbox.
Right.
What's that?
So each major organization within the Air Force, they have a 2-letter code.
Oh, okay.
So this mailbox is basically the central hub for all communications, a digital command center, where information flows in and out and keeps everything moving.
Okay, so we've got this world of acquisition support, this world of secretariat support.
Right.
But then we also have this more traditional clerical and admin support. What does that look like in the Pentagon?
Well, you might think it's the most boring of the three, but there's still some interesting stuff in there. You know, it mentions preparing and distributing correspondence, which in this context could be pretty interesting.
Are we talking like classified documents?
Potentially.
Yeah.
Or sensitive information.
That could impact national security. So it's not just sending out memos.
Yeah, not just memos. And again, they highlight accuracy and attention to detail.
Well, yeah, one typo could have serious consequences.
And this is where I think that non-personal services emphasis comes in again. There's a level of responsibility and accountability. It's a whole other level than your typical office job.
Yeah. The document also mentions supporting commanders' programs like security management, records management.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine being the person who has to keep track of all the classified documents.
I know, right? Making sure they're properly stored and handled.
You're like the guardian of secrets.
And it requires a really deep understanding of those security protocols.
Because they mention things like TAC cards for access control.
Right.
Procedures for securing facilities, safeguarding government property.
Absolutely. It's a highly secure environment. And even those seemingly mundane tasks play a role in maintaining that security.
It's all connected. Okay, so we've got like a good sense of the different types of admin work that are happening at the Pentagon. But what about the work environment itself?
Right.
What is it actually like to work there?
Yeah, that's where I think the general information section of this TWS gets really interesting. It gives us a little peek behind the curtain at the culture, security protocols, even hints about the work-life balance. The document actually says that contractors are expected to align with the customer agency's normal hours. But any overtime pay requires approval. Just like a really strict culture of sticking to the schedule.
Or maybe a tight budget.
Or both, you know?
Yeah, it could be both.
I mean, it is interesting, though, that they do allow for compensatory time for temporary spikes in work.
So they're aware that sometimes you just got to put in the extra hours.
Right, exactly. I bet there's some stories there. Imagine a major international incident breaks out. Everyone's got to scramble, working late into the night, trying to put together briefings, coordinate with allies.
I can't even imagine. I bet it creates like a sense of camaraderie among the people who work there.
That's a good point. Like you're all part of something bigger, entrusted with protecting these secrets. And the document actually emphasizes that focus on maintaining a strong workforce.
Okay.
There's a whole section about replacing personnel with the goal of filling any vacancy within 14 days.
Wow. So they really don't want any gaps in the system?
No gaps. They want to make sure that everything's covered at all times.
It's all about that continuity.
Efficiency, keeping things running smoothly.
Yeah, and they aim for an employee turnover rate of 20% or less.
That's pretty interesting. Makes you wonder if that's high or low for this type of work.
Yeah. Okay, let's shift gears a bit.
Okay.
And talk about travel.
Okay.
Because this document mentions travel requirements.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling we're not talking about, like, your average business trip here.
No, I think you're right. The document mentions CONUS and OCONUS travel.
So within the U.S. and outside the U.S.
Depending on your role, you could be going anywhere, meeting with officials all over the world.
The document talks about functioning effectively under pressure,
keeping your cool,
maintaining a professional demeanor at all times.
So you can't let the excitement get to you.
Right, exactly. All joking aside, this document really shows that every little detail matters at the Pentagon, even those seemingly mundane tasks.
It's all connected to national security.
It all plays a role.
Yeah.
It's fascinating how something like an admin support role can be so vital in such a complex organization.
And I think that's one of the things I find so compelling about this whole thing. It's a glimpse into a world that most people don't ever get to see. And it shows that even behind the scenes, in the everyday work, there's still a story there.
Well said.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered the tasks, the work environment, the culture. This PWS really hints at some of the challenges.
Right.
Like there's a whole section on organizational conflict of interest mitigation plans.
Yeah, that's a huge part of government contracting.
Yeah.
You know, the government needs to be sure that the contractor doesn't have any competing interests that could create problems.
So it's a matter of trust, but it's also national security, right?
Absolutely.
Because you're giving them access to potentially sensitive information.
And that's why there are so many safeguards in place.
This document also mentions something called controlled unclassified information. CUI. What's that?
So it's basically a category of information that's sensitive but not classified.
Okay.
So think about things like, personally identifiable information or financial data.
So stuff that needs to be protected.
Yeah.
But it's not like top secret.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the PWS says that the contractor has to comply with all the Department of Defense instructions on handling CUI.
Okay, so there's a whole other set of rules for this type of information.
Absolutely. Which really highlights that information security is a very complex thing.
Yeah.
It's not just about protecting state secrets.
Right.
It's also about protecting people's privacy.
Yeah, making sure data is handled properly.
Exactly. And maintaining the integrity of the whole system.
It's interesting how we started out talking about these admin tasks, and we've ended up talking about national security and government transparency and all this stuff. It really shows how all these things are connected, and how even something that seems really simple on the surface can actually be quite complex. Yeah. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap things up.
Yeah.
We started with what seemed like a pretty boring document.
I know.
But we ended up going on quite a journey.
We did. It just goes to show that even in the most mundane parts of government, there's a story to be found.
Absolutely. Until next time, keep exploring.
Keep questioning.
And keep diving deep.
Absolutely.